Hello. Hi, guys.
And we're off.
Yes.
Twice in 1 week.
I know. Are you sick of me? Are you done?
I was sick of you before the first call started.
Oh, that's nice. Wow. I need to find a new podcast host.
What would you do without the abuse?
That's true.
You wouldn't even know what to do.
That's true. That's true.
But at least only one of your abusers is here today.
That's true.
And I guess we'll see about our guest, if he will be included in that as well. With us today, we have Jay Sanderson from newly of the American Jewish University out in LA. So, hey, Jay. Oh, I think your mic cut out.
Welcome.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Oh, now we can.
No, you're back.
We got it. We got it.
All right.
I'll repeat what I said. Hey, Jay, another Jay. I always like to meet another Jay.
Yeah.
See, that's always, it's something about Jays.
Yeah.
It's very weird. All the Jays I meet are all incredibly intelligent and good looking, and it's, I don't know.
Wow.
It's strange. I'm sure it's a pure coincidence.
I intend to be actually the exception to several of the things you just said.
Jay is very, very famous here in LA. This is a big deal for us because Jay was, I don't want to steal the thunder of your intro of Jay, but Jay was the head Jew of Los Angeles for many years. And I won't tell Rabbi Kunin that, but I'll say that you were the real head Jew. Is that okay for me to say?
I think one of the challenges we have in Jewish life is everybody thinks they're a head Jew.
I know.
Including Rabbi Kunin. And I think the problem is for the world is that they can't understand which head Jew is actually a head Jew. So I'll tell you right now, I'm more of a tail Jew than a head Jew.
Well, I don't know we'll get into what you're doing now, but for many years, how many years were you at the Federation?
I was intentionally the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles for 12 years. I say intentionally because I think another challenge we have in Jewish life is people stay in their jobs too long. And I intentionally said when I started, if I'm successful, I'll stay 12 years. And
really,
I think most people thought I was successful, but I honored the 12 years.
Wow. That is really interesting.
Awesome.
It's one of the things that I have written down that I want to talk to you about, but we can get to that later, which is talent and community leadership. But we could talk about it later.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So I think Hialeah. Oh my God, it's been a day. Hialeah and I have been excited to talk to you because over the past month or two or so, we've been talking quite a bit about Jewish education in America, and what's going well, what could be improved, what does it look like in the future, etc. So we're excited to talk to you, given your new role within the American Jewish University. But before we get to that, I know you just sort of hit on really quickly about your background, but maybe if you could give us a little more of your background and your history with Judaism in America and your road to becoming the head Jew of LA.
I don't know where you want me to start. I always say to people, the story depends on where you start.
When was your bris?
Oh no! Look, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and I grew up in the projects outside of Boston. I was a victim of a significant anti-Semitic attack when I was 13. Buried alive only by the grace of God. Did someone hear me screaming after hours and hours being buried alive in the middle of the night? That negative experience led to my first major positive Jewish experience, which was the Jewish community felt like they needed to save me. And so I went to Israel on a Jewish agency trip the next year and spent the summer in Israel, where I met David Ben-Gurion.
Wow.
Who put his hand on my shoulder and said, promise me that you will always protect the Jewish people in the state of Israel. I took that to heart. I went to film school. That wasn't taking it to heart. I became a television producer and writer and created a media company that was half Jewish and half for-profit. I produced a landmark PBS series called The Jewish Americans. The most
yeah.
I also produced the most significant television program about genocide called Worse Than War with Danny Goldhagen, who's an expert on the Holocaust and genocide, as well as the highest rated food show on PBS 3 years in a row, which was called New Jewish Cuisine.
Wow.
So I was a media executive. I'm a professionally trained chef as well, which is why I got into the food production world. And then from there, I had some stops along the way, but from there, I was the out-of-the-box candidate they hired to run the Jewish Federation because they felt at the time, the leadership, that they wanted outside thinking. Because, again, if you have the same people sitting at the same tables having the same conversations, you have the same results. Yeah. And so I did that for 12 years. I blew up the model of what a federation was at the time, which was an umbrella organization. And I told people, we don't need an umbrella Jewish organization in Los Angeles where it never rains. So I tried to get us to be focused on making an impact in certain areas, and I can go into those areas. But where can you make your mark? The Jewish community is small, but we're broad in many ways. We're broad and diversified in terms of how people identify. You talk about Jewish education. Jewish education means a lot of things to a lot of people. Synagogue membership and involvement, is on the downturn and has been for a very long time. And so I've always tried to be an innovator. Most people think I'm kind of a disruptor of sorts. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do now. And that's what I think I've done successfully throughout my long career.
Wow.
That's great.
That was a fascinating bio. Where in outside Boston did you grow up?
I was born in Boston, and then I moved to Salem, Massachusetts. The place of the witches.
Yes. Wow. I grew up in Newton.
The place of the Jews. See, I lived in Salem, where I was one of 2 Jewish students in my high school, and you went to Newton, where there are 2 non-Jews in your high school.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So,
well, I want to ask a question about your time at the Federation. So, first of all, what are you most proud of your time there? Can you think of something?
Look, I'm proud of a lot of things, and I lived through a lot of crises in Southern California and in the world. Nothing obviously compares to what happened on October 7th, but clearly I lived through several wars in Gaza, massive fires in Israel, the Woolsey fire in Southern California, COVID. And throughout that, I think that what I'm most proud of is that the Federation became central to the Jewish organization, not because it has been around a long time, but because everybody looked to the Federation. Every organization, everybody across the Jewish world looked at the Federation as the place where we actually made things happen and made an impact. And the second thing I'll say is, because Jay's on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast, Chaya, is that most people felt before I got to the Federation that the Jewish community was really centered in the East. That New York was the center. Even Chicago was more important than LA. And I think what I did was, with my colleagues and with great lay leaders, I never did anything myself. You can't accomplish anything, especially in the Jewish world, if you're not surrounded by great people. Together, we made LA as important a Jewish community in the diaspora as any other community.
That's interesting. Yeah, it does feel very East Coast centric, a lot of the Jewish world, but it's true. We try. Hillel always struggles with this. I'm a Hillel director, and they always struggle. All the conferences are on the East Coast. All the meetings are East Coast time. We're always begging them to think more West Coast.
So here is a very central issue. And the central issue, and I learned this by spending 5 years of my life producing the Jewish Americans. When Jews came to America, they mostly came through Ellis Island in the east. Some of them came through the south and other parts, but the Jewish community was centered in the East Coast, and institutional life was centered on the East Coast, and everything went in those days from east to west. But over the last 25 years, I would argue, with Hollywood, with Silicon Valley, with everything else, all the trending, not just in the Jewish community, but in the broader community, has gone west to east. The problem is that the Jewish community hasn't woken up to it, right? It hasn't woken up to it. And that's part of the reason I think we got caught post October 7th in a situation where we didn't understand where all this anti-Semitism was coming from. And yet, if we had really brought more people from the West Coast who understood the impact of TikTok and social media, as opposed to the people on the East Coast who were still thinking about the value of the New York Times, and we're behind in understanding that people get their content in their news from things produced on the West Coast, not on the East Coast.
It's a great point.
I think that's one of the things that the Jewish community needs to understand, which is we have to be ahead of the curve. We can't, one of the things I'm doing now by creating this 2050 Institute is recognizing that playing defense is not in our best interest. Fighting anti-Semitism, frankly, is a losing fight, because we have to, first of all, focus on, and that's why I love your podcast, we have to focus on why should you even be Jewish? What's the value proposition? Not, people hate us. I've had too many conversations with people who said, October 6th, I didn't care. Now I do care, right? That's not okay. We have to build a flourishing, dynamic, diverse Jewish community with multiple entry points. Kai, you see this on the campuses that you're involved in. And we have to double down on making people understand that it's the joy in Judaism, not the oi in Judaism, that we have to push forward with.
So it's interesting to hear you say that. We just interviewed, do you know Tanya White?
No.
So she has a podcast called Books and Beyond. She was very close with Rabbi Sachs, and she has a podcast series about his books. And we just interviewed her, and we actually, this exact topic came up in our discussion with her about, Rabbi Sachs's philosophy versus, I shouldn't say versus, but, different from maybe Dara Horn's philosophy, which is, more of a positive versus more of a negative view of Judaism and Jewish history. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because that's a topic that's come up several times now. Could you, in regards to that, when you talk about putting more of a optimistic or positive spin is probably not the best word, but we'll stick with it. A spin on what it means to be Jewish in, now, what do you think are the biggest messages that are not being communicated to the diaspora today, and in how they should think about being Jewish?
But, in 2011, the Pew Research Center put out a big study on Jews in America. It was very controversial. Jewish leaders got very disrupted by it, because, first of all, it talked about the greatest drivers in Jewish life, and to most people, right? And you know what they are? They were food and comedy, right? That's how people identify. And we make jokes about that. But the truth is, if people feel good about something that they're eating and it brings back memories of their childhood, that's good. If people laugh, that's good, especially since laughing in the world we live in right now is a challenge concept. And I was invited to travel around it was before the Federation, or right at the beginning of the Federation. And I was invited to talk all over the world, and from Israel and Europe, the United States, to sit on panels and talk about the Pew study. So I thought, unlike a lot of the people I was sitting with, I wasn't going to read the 2-page synopsis. I went to Minneapolis, where Pew is, and I went through all the research, and I thought, this is pretty significant stuff, but I really still didn't feel like I got it. So I have a friend who was one of the first major branding executives in Hollywood, and I asked him for a favor. I asked him to connect me to the highest ranking person at Apple at the time, 2011, that was in the branding and marketing part of Apple. Happened, by the way, Jay, was an Irish Catholic from Dorchester that was the number 2 guy at Apple at the time. He's since, cashed out, like every smart Apple person probably did. And I asked him for 3 hours of my time, 3 hours, I said. And I said, 2 hours, go through this document, and 1 hour, talk to me. So about 2 months later, as I was getting ready to do my road show, I called him on the phone, and he said something I'm not sure I can say on edJEWcation, but he basically said, WTF, for your listeners.
Yes.
He said, I'm an Irish Catholic from Dorchester. I've known a lot of Jews, and this is how I've always felt about my Jewish friends. You have everything. You have the best product, right? There is. I mean, Shabbat's amazing, right?
Amazing.
Everybody should be celebrating Shabbat. You have the best product. He said, but when I go through this and I really think about it, I think this. You have the best product, but you couldn't package it worse. You couldn't market it worse, and you have no idea who your audience is. Okay? That conversation changed my entire life. It changed my whole outlook, because I realized something that I think is dramatically true about the Jewish community today, and it's getting more and more true, and unfortunately it's a problem, which is we do not know our audience, or I should say, we do not know our audiences. So we give them what I would call 1950s Judaism. We created institutions in the 50s. They still exist. The best example is JCCs, because JCCs thought if they had a pool, people would come. In Southern California, as Chaya knows, everybody has a pool, right? And so you need more to get people in the door than just the pool. But the pool idea wasn't a bad idea in its time. We have to constantly evolve engagement in the Jewish community. And I'll say this one last thing. What I've learned post-October 7th, the hard way, is the next generations, and I'm talking about whatever the initials are of them, but the young people from the 30s down, those generations, they define identity, engagement, and community dramatically different than the three of us do, and we are in dramatically different generations ourselves. They look at it differently. It doesn't matter, by the way, if you're a modern Orthodox Jew or a completely unaffiliated Jew, or it doesn't matter. They look at that terminology different. They gather different. They communicate on their phones. They don't communicate by talking on their phones. They text on their phones. We have not been equipped to embrace the opportunities of the time we're in, and consciously address the challenges. And that is one of the big fallings of Jewish institutional life right now. And one of the reasons I left the Federation after 12 years was I thought someone else should come in who had more experience in certain areas and was different than I was, because I have a certain mindset, and you can't keep the same mindset in leadership over and over again and expect different results.
I want to make 2 points about what you just said. I mean, I had an epiphany at the Seder last week. I had 50 students at my house on the second night, and I served gefilte fish. And, my father's a Chabad rabbi here in town. I'm the Hillel director. I'm kind of a unicorn in these two worlds, right? And at my father's shul, when you put out a platter of gefilte fish, you can't find a half a piece left within 5 minutes, because the community that my father's serving that comes to shul are an older generation. They gobble up the gefilte fish before you could even say Good Shabbos, right? At my Hillel Seder, I don't think 2 students touched the gefilte fish. And I started talking to them. I was like really struck by this, right? Started talking to them. You know what I realized? None of them grew up eating gefilte fish. They didn't have grandparents that served gefilte fish. They never tasted it. All they see is it on the kosher aisle. It looks disgusting. And I thought to myself, I know it's a minor thing, but actually it's a huge cultural shift that we're talking about within the Jewish community, right? I mean, it's a big deal.
You know what? It is that story. You need to keep telling that story. It's profound and very symbolic, and think about all of the elements of it. First of all, gefilte fish. My experience of gefilte fish, when your bubby, your grandmother, whoever made the gefilte fish in your family growing up, the house smells terrible. Right? Like, you might like the way it tastes, but it smells terrible. And I've made gefilte fish before because I'm a chef. But it's a gray, hard to understand piece of food that you put in without context, without history and context. It means nothing. Therefore, what your experience tells us is that either we have to do a better job of explaining the history and the story of gefilte fish, or we have to recognize that I always say the best management book I ever read was a terrible book with a great title. The title I use over and over again, and the title of the book is "What Got Us Here Won't Get Us There."
Right.
Now, gefilte fish is something that we have to look at and figure out: can we reimagine gefilte fish for the next generations, or do we just have to come up with something else?
Yeah.
And that is so deeply profound. That piece of gefilte fish story that you're talking about, your table, that is very symbolic of the place that we're in.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing I would say. We are phenomenal. This is a big part of the thinking of the 2050 Institute. We as a people are probably the greatest people in the history of the world at looking backwards. That's what Pesach is, the repeating of a story every year over and over again. We are decent at looking at today. Decent, not great, decent. We are terrible at forecasting out. One of the reasons what I'm doing is called the 2050 Institute. It's about really looking at the next generation of Jewish life in North America.
Right.
What will be the challenges and the opportunities? We as a people we think long range planning is tomorrow, right? Where are we going for Shabbos? That's what long range planning is. That is not going to get us to where we need to get to as a people. And lastly, on this point, I think we've been brought up with this concept that we have survived generations, and we've survived the Babylonians, and we've survived the Egyptians, and we've survived the Holocaust. All those things are true. But it doesn't mean we're going to survive what comes next, because we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
So all right. So let's talk about the 2050 Institute. So you just moved over there fairly recently.
Well, moving over there is a different kind of a concept. I'm creating this project that will live at American Jewish University.
Okay.
But this honestly, Jay, is an idea that I've been living with for about 18 years.
Wow.
So why don't you explain sort of the genesis of that and the concept and what you hope to achieve with it?
So I think, and I've kind of hit these two things in different ways. I think that we as a Jewish people, and I think America suffers from this. I think the state of Israel suffers from this. We have two significant problems. One is, I believe, we have historically had the wrong people sitting at the wrong tables, having the wrong conversations. I'll give you a very clear example, which is very connected to your podcast and what you've been doing. In 1993, I sat at my very first table about the high cost of living Jewishly. Now, since 1993, I've sat at over 100 of these tables. My dear friend, Rabbi Erwin Kula, and I had this conversation in New York a couple months ago. I've sat in hundreds of those conversations. And today, the cost of living Jewishly is exponentially higher than it was in 1993. It's way beyond inflation, right? Because the people sitting at these tables were either unable or unwilling to look at the root causes of the high cost of living Jewishly. Okay, so piece one is getting the best people in every discipline. I'm not talking about just getting rabbis and heads of schools and all that. No disrespect, but that's not who I want at my table. I want the best scientists, the best futurists, the best media executives, the best tech executives. I want the best of the best people to sit at a table, bring their core expertise, which is different than anything that exists in the Jewish community, to really think about the challenges and opportunities in Jewish life. The example I also say right now is, I believe in the year 2000, if I had created the 2025 Institute, we would not be in the place we're in right now, because there would have been people at the table that would have seen TikTok coming. Yeah. But we didn't have those people sitting at the table. So the best people in their disciplines, the smartest people who never sit at Jewish tables, by the way, They never sit at Jewish tables. They look around boards of Jewish organizations, and these are not their peers. These are not the kind. They don't want to talk about, who's the insurance company that's going to take care of the synagogue. They don't want that. They're big thinkers. You get those big thinkers together. Second piece is, as I said before, a communal long-range planning, not institutionally driven and not politically driven. Let's talk about the whole community as without any institutional biases and any other biases. And so that's the general idea. Now, this is a wheel, and I say the hub is this an annual retreat of these best and brightest individuals who will be coming up with ideas, and those ideas will be turned into projects, and those projects will be connected to funders, and then fully funded big ideas, big projects will then be connected to either the right practitioners, people running organizations that where it should live, or to new people who create new initiatives. A big chunk of this also is the future. We were talking a little bit about leaders, right? And professional leaders. And we have a big pipeline problem. This has a fellows program. Now, there's tons of leadership programs in the Jewish world. I've created a couple myself at the Federation. We have a phenomenal program called the Community Leadership Institute in LA. But those leadership programs have some distinct challenges. One is, once you go through a program, more often than not, there's no place for you to end up, because people sit on boards of Jewish organizations for decades and don't leave them. Second thing is, if you have a big idea, you can't do anything with it. So we're going to identify the best and brightest people who have already demonstrated great leadership, both professional young Jews and lay leaders in their late 30s, early 40s. And they're going to be mentored by these best and the brightest individuals. And if they come up with an idea vetted through the Institute, they will receive a Jewish version of the MacArthur Grant. Chaya will get $1 million and all kinds of support from the mentors and everything else to take her idea and make it into a reality.
Right.
The last piece of this, the last spoke in this really of note, is that we are playing whack-a-mole as a Jewish community, right? The best example is college campuses right now. I mean, right. There's no doubt that there are major issues for Jewish students on college campuses. Chaya sees this every day. There's no doubt about that. But you can't move forward by just telling these universities and colleges they're bad, doing bad things. You got to really be proactive.
Yes.
This is about playing offense, not defense. So there'll be discipline-related retreats every year where we'll bring in the heads in the educational world, the heads in the media world, the heads in the political world, who will sit together in their disciplines and talk about the challenges they're seeing and come up with positive, proactive, not reactive and negative responses towards the issues that they're seeing. So this will be a place at the Brandeis Bardeen campus of American Jewish University, which we will bring to the West Coast, by the way, purposely the West Coast, all these people in all these disciplines to help us together look at the next 25 years of Jewish life in North America and create the kind of Jewish future for our children and grandchildren that we dream about, that we want in the deepest possible way.
So let me, did you want to?
Well, I have so many questions and things I can say, but if you want to,
let me ask one question.
Podcast,
yeah,
right?
6 hours. We have 6
yes,
hours.
yeah, exactly.
I heard
At
this
least
is the longest. I mean, forgetting that Rabbi Kunin, not Rabbi Kunin, your father, not Rabbi Kunin. He's one of the other big last names in the Chabad movement.
Yeah,
which is your last name. I hear when Rabbi Sufrin is on, it feels like the podcast is 6, 8, 10 hours long.
Yeah. Oh, my dad.
Let's actually do one.
Well, he feels like it's 5 minutes. Haile and I feel like it's 6 hours.
He likes to. He could talk for 6 hours straight if we didn't interrupt him. But yeah.
So all right. So I want to ask you something. So I want to tell something I've been thinking about recently, very quickly, and there's a point to this. So you were talking about getting the best of the best involved with the program, which is I think your vision for bringing in this multidiscipline approach is is great. Here's my question. Um, so since October 7th, obviously I've heard a rumor there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood. That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
And you've had a lot of Jews and like Deborah Messing and Michael Rappaport and people like that who have been involved, which is great. On the other hand, there have been two people who recently, I don't know, I think it's because of Passover, has really been bothering me, their engagements recently. And that's in particular Adam Sandler and Steven Spielberg. And the reason they in particular bother me is because those are two people who in different ways have made a lot of their careers on the backs of their Jewishness. And neither of them have said almost anything since October 7th. And you might know them, so I'm not expecting you to say anything about them. But for me personally, I think it's really gross, honestly.
I do know them, and I will say this.
I figured.
I will say this, Stephen.
So I'll just my question real quick. So my question is, how do you get these types? Because when you talk about this multidisciplinary approach, I assume that's the caliber of person you want to get involved across these different disciplines. How do you get people like that involved and get them excited about being engaged with the diaspora Judaism?
Yeah, well, I think Hollywood is a terrible example, unfortunately. Because,
because
and I'll tell you why. I think your concern, Jay, is a reasonable concern. I think that, first of all, this isn't about getting celebrities, so we'll take Adam out of the picture. Stephen is more than a celebrity.
Right.
Stephen has had more impact on society than almost anybody else in my lifetime. And he has done some extraordinary things in the Jewish world, including obviously the Shoah Foundation. Mm-hmm. So what people do privately and publicly is not always the same. And there are better examples, frankly. I mean, one of the challenges with Deborah and Michael and Elon and Mayim and all those individuals who are stepping forward is they are not. I mean, the argument is, where's the quote unquote A-listers, right? And that's right. Like the Adams and everything else. Now, Jerry Seinfeld went above and beyond anything he's ever done in his life.
Absolutely.
And so some people are stepping forward. It's very challenging for people who make their living out of addressing multiple audiences to get too far out sometimes without feeling the negative impact in their career. I mean, even on the other side, there are individuals like the young misguided woman who was Snow White, who's gone on the other side. And, so people's careers get really hurt by becoming political, right? So part of the challenge of the moment is this anti-Semitism piece is being very conflated with Israel, driven a lot by anti-Israel sentiment. I don't say anti-Zionist sentiment because none of the people who are anti-Israel even know what Zionism is. It's probably the most understood term in America right now, what Zionism is. I've never seen more people misunderstand and co-opt a concept. But that being said, celebrities have multiple challenges. Now, I think they should still go out there, especially the ones that don't have a lot to lose. So I myself am disappointed in some people. I'm not necessarily disappointed in the two people you mentioned, but there's hundreds of people we could bring. We could talk about.
Totally.
Yeah, I didn't mean to pick on them. Those are just two top of mind.
No.
I've been thinking about.
You made a very valid point. What I'm talking about is the CEO of Pfizer, the CEO of Amazon. These are Jews who don't sit at Jewish tables,
right? And
I want what's in their head, not the fact that they have a big audience. There might be some people who cross over, but very rarely. I'm not saying that that Adam or Jerry or some of the comedians that I know. I'm not saying that they're not immensely talented and brilliant people, but they're not the kinds of minds that I want to bring to the table. Right? It's really about leaders in the industry. people ask me all the time, is this a Jewish version of the Aspen Institute? And I say yes and no. And I say yes because one of the founders of the Aspen Institute told me that the original concept of the Aspen Institute was what I'm saying, which was they thought that if they could get the best and brightest people who were leaders in their industries and their disciplines to come together, where they never do, because scientists don't sit with media executives. They never mind the Jewish piece. These people never sit together. But if you got a very diverse, high level group of people with power, influence, and brains together, and you educated them on climate change as an example, you could really address climate change as opposed to just having scientists look at it or just having politicians look at it. So I'm adapting the original concept to the Aspen Institute to this. The Aspen Institute has become a big public event now, and I've spoken there, I've been there. This will have a public and private piece, but I'm focusing on, frankly, transforming and disrupting the Jewish world. That's the goal. The goal is not to have, people talk about this all year long and pay $5,000 to come. The goal is what institutions we have right now, the way people are looking at the Jewish community is not going to get us to the places we want to get to over the next generation.
I want to bring up a topic that you've mentioned a few times, but I think is very painful for the Jewish community to address. And I'll just be blunt about it. And it's a little bit of like insider baseball and a little bit of like, unearthing family secrets. But I think that those of us who work within the Jewish community and are part of, Jewish community leadership have to be honest with the fact that there seems to be a big failure of Jewish institutions since October. We see it since October 7th. I mean, if we look at demographics, if we look at involvement, from top to bottom, it just everything to me, it's like, when are we going to take, when are we going to be honest and look at all the different organizations that are costing us as a community billions of dollars, right? There's so much money in the Jewish community going into institutional Judaism, and so much of it failed, right? And so what I like what you're doing, because we need a bird's eye view of what's going on, and we need an opportunity to say, like, these things, it's going to be painful, right? And it's going to hurt, but like, these are the institutions that have actually failed the Jewish community and not helped. And I don't know how we'll get there.
We are not self-reflective.
Right.
We're not self-critical. The reality is the amount of money that was spent fighting anti-Semitism before October 7th, one could look at and say, what was it all for? How many more studies do we need to do? You also have to recognize the fact that it goes back to the pipeline. Yeah. We have a critical challenge that we never address, which is the best and brightest young Jews don't wake up one day. there are exceptions, Chai. You are probably an exception. But the truth of the matter is, people don't aspire to be the head of a Jewish organization. Jews now aspire to make money. They aspire to be investment bankers. They aspire to be this, that, and the other thing. They don't. That's why the rabbinic pipeline, the Jewish professional pipeline is very challenged. Then we also don't pay people enough. We don't recognize that. So we have some built-in structural problems in the community. People stay in their jobs too long. People stay in there. In the Jewish world, if you're in your job 40 years, that's a great achievement. But it's not a great achievement because you are not up on what's going on in the world. You become a person living in a vacuum. So we have all these elements within the Jewish community that no one has been able to call out, right? We're not self-critical. We haven't built a pipeline. We haven't valued Jewish professionals to make it an attractive career for people to get into. We have too much Jewish institutions. Before 5 years ago, if you looked at the websites of the top 150 Jewish organizations in America, you would see 5 of them at most that put anti-Semitism in their mission statement. Now all 150 do. Does that mean that all 150 of them actually have the core expertise to deal with anti-Semitism? Of course they don't. One would argue that the top 5 aren't doing that well. Organizations also go where the money is. And I'll tell you, here's a pertinent example of a story. from the end of my federation time that's connected again to what you talk about on normal podcasts, right? Your normal, not podcast with crazy Jay Sanderson. Here's what happens. I wanted, we have too many in Los Angeles, too many at this moment, too many day schools and not enough students. When you go back to the high cost of living Jewishly, it's because we're too much in the real estate business and we shouldn't be. Okay. Right. 2 conservative movement day schools within 3 miles of each other. Both of them at the time of these conversations, they had about 50% enrollment. So you put the 2 together, you have a full school and it costs a lot less, right? Conservative movement day schools within 3 miles. I met with the day school heads and they both said the same thing to me. Well, we can't merge. We're too different. Now, first of all, if that's true, we got a real big problem, but it's not true. And because you know why? Because both of those people think to themselves in this conversation, if there's 2 schools, there's only one head of school.
Right.
Right? That's one thing. The second thing is the people that are in leadership in the day school movement, as an example, the board members of day schools are really only on the boards of those day schools as long as those kids are in school, and then they move on. So you don't have any real leadership that is thinking about the institution beyond their own kid, right? Yep. So you have all these structural issues. They're creating what I think is a perfect storm in Jewish life right now. And if anyone stood up and said it, they would be called out by their peers. It happens that at this moment in my life, I don't have to worry about anyone firing me. But it's not easy to say these things. Yeah, it's not easy to say that, these institutions, before they go off and raise another $100 million to fight this and do that, should actually question, were they effective with the money they raised before they're raising the next 100 million or the next 100,000?
Well, this is one of the critiques that I have to my own institution, which is Hillel, is that we do not own the narrative of what's going on college campuses. And we have allowed outside organizations who don't have boots on the ground on campus, who know what's going on, to be the ones telling the story to the American Jewish people. And I think it's been a real crisis for us. And I'll give you one example. When I read every week, I feel like the Jewish Journal in LA has a cover story about anti-Semitism on campus, and never is there a quote from a Hillel director, a Hillel employee, a Hillel student. It's all the ADL said this, and this one said that, and the other one said that, and and it's like, why aren't we the owners of what's going on campus? We should be the one telling the story. And we're not.
Look, when the first major anti-Semitic story came out, it was at UCLA, let's say 10 years ago. I was at the Federation then. And at the time, there was a strong Hillel at UCLA and the Federation. And I wanted to impact the administration, which I did in the short term. And the chancellor, Gene Block, said to me at the time, can you help me? Because all of a sudden it's a different term for encampment, but all of a sudden we have all these Jewish organizations fighting anti-Semitism at UCLA. I agree. Look, I have a deep belief in the power of Hillel. I have a great respect for Adam, the CEO.
Same.
I think he's one of the greats in the Jewish world. And I have great empathy for you, Chaya, and your colleagues, because you want to create joyous Judaism on college campuses, but it's almost impossible to do now. And I agree with you. Boots on the ground, experience in the setting is more important than somebody coming in and telling campuses what they shouldn't do and engaging in different ways. I think, if you think about how campus life was before this, you had 2 major organizations on college campuses. You had Chabad and you had Hillel, right? Mm-hmm. Kids went to Chabad because we know there's a more liberal alcohol policy and the food's better, right? So that's where kids went. They went to Chabad for Purim, and then they went to Hillel to be with their friends. Even though still 80% of the kids didn't go to either place.
Right.
Now we're in this really bad place. And we need Hillels to be strong. we need these other organizations to actually either go out of business, because the other thing we have is we have way too many Jewish organizations, way too many.
Yeah.
There's so much duplication. That goes back to the high cost of living Jewishly.
Yeah.
Way too many.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, we've, with the time I spend with Chayalei on the podcast, we talk about Hillel every now and then, and and have discussions, and I think this actually really dovetails well with some of the conversations that we've been having with you, Jay, is to figure out what we want the conversation to be outside of the Jewish community. We need to first figure out what the conversation within the Jewish community is.
Yeah.
And I even think with Hillel, how can Hillel comment on what's happening on campuses when it doesn't even seem like Hillel really understands what their own story is to their students, right?
That's a problem.
So
it is an advantage. It is an advantage that Chabad has. Chabad has many advantages, in my opinion, but one of the greatest advantages that Chabad has is they have a very simple story. They have a very simple mission. They know exactly what they're doing. Everybody's on the same page, and either you like them or you don't like them. That's fine. You can disagree, agree, whatever. But Hillel comes, and we have 15 different missions and 75 stories, and it's much more difficult to sell that than to a simple story that Chabad is telling.
But you can, when there's a healthy campus, when there's a healthy Hillel.
Yes.
Right. That there is a direct connection to a healthy campus to a healthy Hillel.
Yeah, that's
Chabad
right.
is, look, one would argue there's also way too many Chabads. I mean, it's like Chabad and Starbucks have a lot in common, right?
Yes. Yes.
The people that work at Starbucks wear uniforms. Chabad wears uniforms, right?
Yeah.
There's one in every corner of each.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, having too many Jewish engagement organizations is a good problem. Yeah. Having too many organizations that are doing everything else, including fighting anti-Semitism, is a challenging problem. And going back to the very first thing we talked about, when you're talking about someone speaking about college campus life from a Hillel, we also have created this noisy environment where everybody is the head Jew, right? Mm-hmm. Was I the head Jew in Los Angeles? I was the head Jew of the things that I could talk about with authority. Right. There were 90% of what needed to be said I wasn't interested in. Right. I'm not I didn't want to get involved in politics. And we also have to recognize right now the Jewish community is in the crosshairs of what's going on in American politics. These are not things that we experienced 20 years ago. Right. Yeah. So what we really need is all the heads of Jewish organizations to come together and say, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. You do it. I'm going to do that. And Jewish organizations to actually invest in not strategic planning processes right now. How about self-evaluation, right? Mm-hmm. How about, okay, what have we done well in the last 10 years? When it comes to Hillel, it's just right now, the one job I wouldn't want is Adam's job. I think it's overwhelming, and every campus, as you know, Chaya, has distinct qualities.
Correct.
It isn't the same as my example of the 2-day schools.
Right.
This is actually true.
Right.
The Tulane campus has minimal in common with Cal State Long Beach.
Correct.
It just does. Correct. Right. You have geography, the students, whatever they're studying.
Yeah.
Even on the Boston campuses, the MIT campus and the Harvard campus and the Northeastern campus are all three dramatically different, and they're in the same city.
But you know what I will say, and I think this goes beyond college campus. I think this goes to the Jewish experience in general that we have. When I look at a student who comes over to my house and flops down on my couch, I've said this before on the podcast, and then knows where my, stash of soda is in my back fridge, that they feel comfortable going into my garage and getting it. I have done more in Jewish engagement with that student than any speaker in a building, than any, whatever I can give them in my Hillel space, right? There's something personal about making Judaism family oriented. And Chabad does a great job of this. You can't, I
agree.
This is their superpower. And I come from a Chabad family and I am Chabad. So I'm proud of that. But I see it every day in the Hillel model. And I see it even further. I'm friends with people who belong, some of my best friends belong to Reformed temples. The Judaism has to belong in personal relationships, inside homes, etc. And
that is exactly what the marketing and branding executive of Apple understood, right? The non-Jew from Dorchester understood. I will also say, Chaya, on behalf of all the dentists in Orange County that are getting big business because of your soda business, giving
diet
all those sugared sodas.
And in that case, oncologists.
Yeah. Oh my God. Fine. I'll start serving Snapple or something. I don't know. No, but it's true. It's true. Yes.
So all right. So Jay, if we fast forward the clock and now we're in the year 2050 and you've reached your goal of the 2050 Institute, what does success look like to you for the organization?
Yeah, well, in the year 2050, I will be closer to my father, who passed away when I was 5, and my beloved twin brother who died of COVID. So that's where I'll be in 2050. Hopefully, I've done enough to get to the better hotels up there. But in terms of what this would look like is, on the one hand, I can give you an answer, and on the other hand, I can't give you an answer, right? I can give you an answer as 2050 was successful in that it reimagined, and by reimagining Jewish life in North America, it created the kind of transformation we're going to need so that the entry points may be different, engagement may be different, community may look different, synagogues will definitely, if they're in business, will be different. But 2050 led the way to creating the kind of vibrant community that we want it to be. The reason I can't fully answer that is the question that you haven't asked me, which a lot of people ask me is, okay, you're going to get all these brilliant people together. You're going to bring all these funders and everything else together. And I'm way along in all of that right now. So I'm ahead of my own schedule. What are they going to be talking about? What are the challenges they're going to address or the opportunities? And I say, I can't tell you that, because if I predetermine what we're going to talk about, then I'm not going to allow those smart people to give the kind of insight they will, and we'll still be having the same conversations. We just will be having them with different people. So I want different conversations with different people. They're going to see things that are different. And so I can't predetermine what it's going to look like in 2050. But if the 2050 Institute is successful, we will have been extraordinarily disruptive in the most positive possible way.
I love that. I was just reading a letter from a rabbi. This was like in 1926, I think. His name was William Malev, and he was a rabbi at a synagogue in New York. He was a graduate of JTS, of the conservative seminary for rabbis. But he was Orthodox, and he was in an Orthodox synagogue, and he's writing in the letter, he's basically complaining to the JTS leadership that he wants a new job because the old people in his community, they want a rabbi who speaks Yiddish, and they have a lot of opinions about what goes on there, and they have all the money, but they're also completely disengaged, right? And the young people are the ones who are engaged, but they have no money, so they don't get a say on the board. And so he's frustrated, and he needs a new shul because and I was reading this letter, it's from the archives of JTS, and I'm like, oh my God, nothing has changed in 100 years. It was 1926. I'm like, oh my God, it's the same exact story that we're dealing with right now. And it's just like, we need funders who understand, right? Like, I have the money to support these organizations, but I'm old. And so I'm going to give the money, and I'm going to be quiet and let like younger people, I don't know, right? Am I onto something?
A synagogue in Los Angeles, I won't say the denomination of the synagogue because the people will know I'm talking about them, did a major capital expansion. And the chair of the campaign and the chair of the board, I know well. And I know his daughter well. At the time, his daughter was in her late 20s. And I said, I had a meeting, and I said to his daughter, "Oh, you must be really involved in this capital campaign and the expansion plans. Your father must be talking to you all the time, because they're building it for you, not for him."
Right.
And she got very red in the face. And I could see that I almost made her cry. And she said, "Not only is my father not talking to me about it, but when I bring it up, he doesn't want to talk about it." Now, there's a big disconnect between, a guy at the time who was late 60s and his daughter who was late 20s, because if he wasn't building it for her, and this is a real example and a literal example of what you're saying, who was he building it for?
Right.
And we have this, because it's so much easier to raise capital gifts than anything else, we're building different but bigger edifices, and people don't want, this next generation doesn't want to sit in a big room like that.
Yeah.
They want to sit in small rooms. And there's been some leaders, some rabbis over the last 20 years that have gotten that, and they've started their things, and they've found funding. And there's, whether it's the Kitchen in San Francisco or ECAR in Los Angeles, places, in New York, they're coming, by the way, from all the movements. They've come from all the movements, even though they might be trans-denominational and not denominational. The other thing we need to be talking about is denominational Judaism is extinct. The denominational leaders don't want to acknowledge it, but it's extinct. Yeah. Right? People don't identify. There's no 25-year-olds. Very few 25-year-olds are saying, "I'm a Reform Jew. Right. I'm a conservative Jew." In the modern Orthodox, in the Orthodox community, it's different. But I'm seeing some uncomfortable changes there. I'm seeing a lot of young people migrating a little further away from where their families were. Yeah. That doesn't get talked about in the Orthodox community the way it should be. Mm-hmm. And it's still a strong community. But we have to recognize how it goes back to, we can't live in a 1950s Judaism anymore.
Yeah. No, that's right.
It's interesting you say that, because I just had this conversation with somebody a couple of days ago. I'm joining a new synagogue. I'm in Rhode Island, so I'm joining a new synagogue. And the person at the shul I was talking to asked what denomination of synagogue I was looking for, or what do I practice? And I said, I don't devoutly keep kosher, but I wrap tefillin every day. So I don't know what is that. You tell me what that is, and that's what I am. I don't know. So it's interesting that it's true. It's totally true.
I have a son who's a chaplain in the San Jose area in California. He has a master's degree in Jewish something. I don't know actually what it is. Jewish something. He went through studying to become a rabbi. He's not fully finished yet. And he is the most extraordinary Jew I know. He studied in yeshiva in Israel for almost 3 years. And I tell people, I've never met anyone who could lead services in the most Orthodox synagogue in Mea Shearim, and he could lead synagogue services in the most Reformed congregation in Long Beach, right? But and that's the way we need to look at it. Right. We need to figure out a way, and he's also one of the greatest Jews I know. I mean, he bleeds Judaism in a way that I don't bleed Judaism, and I come from a religious family, and some people thought I was the head of the Jewish community in Southern California. 3 or 4 people, by the way. But we need to figure out a way to make everything accessible, to not, and here's the thing, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me about this. Judaism is amazing in all its forms. It's extraordinary in all its forms. We have to recognize we have great things. We have a great product, as the guy at Apple said. We have a great product. But we also have to be open to the fact that by selling it exactly the same way, in the same container, at the same price, we're losing our consumer base, right? So how do we do it? And doesn't mean it's not about dumbing down. Back to Chaya's Gefilte story. I would much rather create a more innovative, contemporary gefilte fish recipe that honors my great-great-grandparents, but also is delicious. And everybody looks at it and says, I want that. Can't be gray anymore, by the way. So, I mean, that Gefilte story to me, in a new way of framing it, in a new way of looking at it, is really what we should be talking about as a Jewish people.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, I have a lot of criticism of Birthright as it is right now, but Birthright to me is one of the most successful Jewish innovations that we had in probably, I don't know, over 100 years. And I'll give you a tiny example. I had a student in my house recently who was telling me that his parents are anti-Zionists. And I said, what do you mean? Your parents are anti-Zionist? Because this kid comes to every Hillel event. He's at all of our pro-Israel stuff. He said, yeah, my parents never have been to Israel and they have no concept of it. Da, da, da. This kid who's been on Birthright is a big Zionist. And he is, you know, so that was an idea. Birthright was an idea that actually, I think, made a huge impact in ways that, you know, we don't even, like, maybe we're starting 100%. Now to see, you know, I have things I could criticize them for, but that's the kind of idea we need.
I agree with you. And that's what I hope that this will germinate these ideas. Birthright, I've been involved in Birthright for since Birthright we began. I was in the early meetings when Birthright was being dreamed about.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's an extraordinary invention in terms of Israel engagement and Jewish engagement, all those other things. We do need to come up with new ideas. Yeah. We also have to take those ideas like Birthright and reimagine them as well, right, for the next generation. Because kids, I mean, look, you know, when I was younger, and I referenced that I went to Israel when I was a teenager, and I've been to Israel over 80 times in my life, and I have family there. I have nephews and nieces, and I have a very famous first cousin named Danny Sanderson, second cousin, Danny Sanderson. I love Israel. I'm a Zionist, all those other things. But Israel drove my Jewish identity, and now it's driving people away. And we have to at least be honest about that and figure out it doesn't drive people away because it's not amazing and great and central to our Judaism. It's driving people away because of the politics around it.
Right.
And we have to figure out new ways of communicating, just like we have to find new ways of communicating about the Shoah as we get further and further away from it. We can't ignore our history. We can't ignore our core values and what it means to be Jewish, but we do have to acknowledge the fact that what got us here is not going to get us there. So how do we get people, the next generations, to go to Israel is going to be another one of the great challenges the community is going to have to address. And it's not going to be the same way it was when Birthright was started. But the other thing I'll say is when it comes to ecosystem issues, Birthright and Hillel have one central challenge that they share. And it's a conversation I had with Eric Fingerhat, who now oversees Jewish Federations of North America.
I love
who preceded Adam, which was the greatest gift that Hillel could give, and the greatest gift that Birthright should be doing is connecting people after the experience to the next experience. I think Hillel needs to create, I've been saying it for years, they need to raise money to create a database so that when your students graduate and they move to St. Louis or they move to Newton, we know where they are, and someone calls them on the phone and says, welcome, we want you to be involved. Same thing with Birthright. I'm very proud of one of the things that we did was we were really at the forefront of engaging Birthright alumni after they got back from the trips in Los Angeles. We've got to figure out a way also to get past, you know, these episodic Judaism pieces and connect the dots and recognize in connecting those dots, it doesn't mean we control what direction they go in.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't mean, you know, one of the great things about Chabad is it seems like they want you to be like them, but they don't really want you to be like them. They just want to push you. Right. And I think it's very misunderstood. And we go back to Jay's, you know, putting on tefillin every day. It's very misunderstood, the whole concept of being on a corner and making you put on tefillin. It's the act of putting on tefillin that is important. It's not actually that you're going to put on tefillin every day.
Right.
It's the intention. So again, we need to recognize some of the inherent challenges in our community that we have ignored, some of the opportunities that are in front of us, some of the great things that exist already that are not actually being developed in the way they could be because money right now, 90% of the money in the Jewish world is going to fighting. And we need 90% of them, I think 90% of the money to go to putting our arms around everybody.
I agree.
I think it's such a great point. We've talked about this in regards to the Rebbe before, about his initiatives, and not trying to get people to swallow the whole whale at once, right? But making it accessible to people in a way that doesn't seem daunting,
right?
And it's so important. It's important.
I'm going back to the guy from Dorchester at Apple. We are blessed. We didn't choose, by the way. None of us chose. None of us chose to have our parents and where we came from. We were really lucky to not be born in Crimea or born in the Sudan or born. We are lucky that we were born at the time we were with our families and born into a faith and a people that has extraordinary power and value. And we have to embrace that power and value. And we have to bring as many of us back together, create a kind of community that is dynamic and thriving, and also recognizes that what door we go into may not be the same as the next person, but Judaism and our values and our love of Israel and Shabbat and all the things that we have, we need to celebrate, we need to share, and we need to reimagine how those things will attract the next generations of young Jews.
Absolutely.
100%.
Wow.
Okay.
I feel like we go on for another hour, but this was great.
Yeah.
So Jay, if people want to get involved, reach out to you, whatever, what's the best way to do that? My
email is JAY, just like your name, .Sanderson, SANDERSON at
That's different. That's not mine.
I know. And by the way, well, that's a longer conversation. J.Sanderson at edJEWcation.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
I love Brandeis Bardeen. I love that spot.
Oh,
we do.
That's the other thing I'm trying to explain to. This is a project that also has a deep connection to place.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, I was one of the people running the Brandeis Bardeen Institute.
Really?
The Brandeis Bardeen Institute is now called the Brandeis Bardeen Campus of American Jewish University. Right. It was founded in 1941 by Shlomo Bardeen, who founded the first Jewish retreat center in the world. So here we are. We're going to do this at the first Jewish retreat center in the world. And he fell in love with that place because it reminded him of Israel.
It does.
Again, I'm doubling down on Jewish. When I'll end what I'm saying to you by saying the most important thing I did at the Jewish Federation when I started was in the very first week on the job, I doubled the size of the word Jewish in the logo.
Yeah. No, that is important. It is.
It is important.
Totally.
Yes.
And that's what we all need to do. We need to double the size of the word Jewish. We need to make sure it means something to us. And the 2050 Institute and American Jewish University is going to help drive the future of the Jewish people.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Good job and kol hakavod and good luck.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thanks for
Jay.
being here.
You're welcome. Happy to come back anytime you want.
Oh, we will. We will.
I would like to be on with Rabbi Sufrin, who's now
Perlmutter. My last name's Perlmutter, like my maiden name.
Your last name is Perlmutter.
My father's Perlmutter. I'm suffering.
Oh, okay. All right.
She's suffering. All right.
I want to be on the podcast with your father.
Yeah, you should. But he won't let you talk. That's the only problem.
Oh, I have no problem talking.
Listen.
All right.
Okay, stop.
All right. Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.